So it finally happened. The call got made. The check got written. Some suit in a tower somewhere just authorized payment to a professional, a psychologist. Not for themselves. No, for you. Yeah, you. Because, apparently, your brain has become a problem that requires institutional intervention. Apparently, the way you think, the way you process, the way you exist in this world has become so fundamentally threatening to their comfortable little reality that they needed to bring in a specialist. Someone with credentials and theories and diagnostic frameworks. Someone who could study you like a specimen, decode you like a puzzle, and deliver a neat little report that would finally explain what the actual hell is wrong with you. Except here's what they didn't expect. Here's what the billionaire sitting in his leather chair sipping his overpriced scotch didn't anticipate when he made that call. The psychologist came back confused. Not concerned, not alarmed, confused. Because after weeks of observation, after analyzing your patterns and your responses and your emotional architecture, after running you through every behavioral model and personality framework they've been trained to use, they hit a wall. Not a wall of resistance, a wall of recognition. They realized they weren't studying a broken person. They were studying someone who had systematically debugged the programming everyone else still runs on. Someone who had identified the code, rejected the updates, and built their own operating system from scratch. The psychologist sat across from that billionaire, report in hand, and said something that made every executive in that room shift uncomfortably in their seats. I don't know how to categorize this one. They're not disordered, they're not unstable, they're just unreachable by conventional influence. And that makes them more dangerous than anyone we've profiled before. You see, here's what really happened. This wasn't about understanding you. This was about controlling you. Because somewhere along the line, you stopped responding to the usual methods. You stopped chasing validation like it was oxygen. You stopped trading your dignity for acceptance. You stopped performing your personality for people who wouldn't know authenticity if it shook their hand. And that made you a glitch in their system. Because the entire infrastructure of modern manipulation relies on predictable human behavior. It relies on people needing approval, fearing rejection, craving belonging. But you walked away from the table. You looked at the game they were all playing. The one where everyone pretends to be happy while slowly dying inside. And you said something unforgivable. You said no. Not loudly, not dramatically. You just stopped playing. And when someone stops playing the game, the players panic. Because if you can exist outside their rules, it means the rules were never real. And if the rules were never real, then everything they sacrificed to follow them was for nothing. So they called in the psychologist. They needed someone with authority to confirm what they desperately wanted to believe, that you were broken, that your refusal to participate was a symptom of something diagnosable, that your independence was actually isolation in disguise, that your silence was depression, your confidence was narcissism, your boundaries were trauma responses. They needed the professional to validate their narrative, to give them permission to dismiss you as damaged, rather than face the terrifying possibility that you were just awake, but the psychologist couldn't do it. Because the data didn't match. Your nervous system wasn't in constant fight or flight. Your social withdrawal wasn't avoidance, it was selection. Your emotional regulation wasn't suppression, it was mastery. You weren't running from pain. You had metabolized it, turned it into fuel, used it to build a fortress where their words couldn't penetrate anymore. The psychologist looked at the patterns and saw something they'd never seen before in all their years of study. Someone who had taken every betrayal, every abandonment, every moment of being underestimated and overlooked, and instead of breaking, had rebuilt themselves into something untouchable. And that terrified everyone in that room. Not because you were violent, not because you were vengeful, but because you represented proof that the system was optional. That the endless pursuit of more, the performance of success, the addiction to external validation, all of it could be rejected. You were walking evidence that there was another way. A way that didn't involve selling pieces of yourself for a seat at their table. A way that didn't require you to shrink so others could feel comfortable. A way that meant you could look at power structures that had dominated human behavior for centuries and simply opt out. And now, after spending all that money, after bringing in the expert, after running you through every analysis available, they're left with a conclusion that makes them sweat in their custom suits. You can't be bought. You can't be shamed. You can't be manipulated through fear or flattered through ego. You have become the worst possible threat to a system built on control. You've become someone who doesn't need them. And people who don't need the system don't just survive, they expose it. The psychologist's report is sitting on that billionaire's desk right now. It's not what he paid for. It's not the diagnosis he wanted. It's something else entirely. It's a mirror. Because buried in all that professional language, underneath all the clinical terminology, there's a message he can't ignore. This individual has achieved something most people spend their entire lives trying to reach. They've separated their identity from external validation. They've processed their trauma instead of projecting it. They've built emotional immunity to manipulation tactics that control 99% of the population. They don't fit our models because they've transcended them. And right there, in that sterile office with its expensive art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city full of people still playing the game, the billionaire realized something that made his stomach turn. He'd just spent a fortune to confirm that someone he'd tried to break had actually won. Not by beating him at his own game, but by refusing to play it at all. Let's talk about what happened before that phone call. Let's rewind to the moment they first noticed you. Because this didn't start with the psychologist. This started months, maybe years ago, when you made a decision that rattled their carefully constructed reality. You stopped showing up the way they expected. You stopped responding to the hooks they'd always used to pull you back in. The guilt trip stopped working. The fear of missing out lost its grip. The need to prove yourself evaporated. And suddenly, you became invisible to their radar. Not because you were hiding, but because you were operating on a frequency they couldn't track. They'd send the usual signals, the passive-aggressive comments designed to make you doubt yourself, the strategic exclusions meant to make you feel small, the subtle competitions meant to keep you chasing. But you didn't bite. You didn't react. You didn't give them the emotional response they were farming for. And that silence, that refusal to engage with their manipulation, it drove them insane. Because manipulators need reaction. They need to see their impact. They need confirmation that their tactics work. But you gave them nothing. Blank face, level voice. Zero emotional availability for their games. And when someone can't get a reaction from you, when they can't make you dance to their rhythm, they start questioning their own power. So they escalated. They brought in reinforcements. They whispered to others, built little coalitions, created narratives about you that were designed to isolate you further. They thought if they could paint you as difficult, strange, too intense, too cold, that you'd come crawling back, desperate to correct their perception. But you didn't. You let them talk. You let them build their stories. You watched from a distance as they constructed this fictional version of you, and you felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even disappointment, just observation. Because somewhere along the way, you'd learned the most powerful lesson anyone can learn. Other people's opinions of you are none of your business. Their stories are their cages, not yours. But they needed closure. They needed to understand why their methods stopped working, why someone they used to control had slipped through their fingers. So, they invested, hired the professional, brought in someone who could supposedly crack the code, and the psychologist went to work, studied your social patterns, your communication style, your emotional responses, interviewed people you used to know, analyzed your past relationships, built psychological profiles, and slowly, a picture emerged. But it wasn't the picture they wanted. It was a picture of someone who had systematically identified every manipulation tactic used against them and developed immunity. Someone who had studied the game while everyone else was just playing it. Someone who had taken every attempt to diminish them and used it as data. You weren't just surviving their attacks. You were studying them, learning from them, building defenses they didn't even know existed. The psychologist found journals, not of pain, but of pattern recognition, notes about human behavior, observations about power dynamics. You'd been doing your own psychological work, your own analysis, and you'd come to conclusions that took most therapists decades to understand. You figured out that most conflict isn't personal, it's projection. That most cruelty comes from people fighting their own reflection. That the ones who tried hardest to break you were the ones most broken inside. And instead of hating them, you became fascinated by them, studied them like a scientist studies specimens. Not with malice, with curiosity. You wanted to understand the mechanics of manipulation, not to use them, but to become immune to them. And that's what the psychologist found. Not a victim, not even a survivor. An observer who had turned their own suffering into education. Someone who had weaponized awareness. Someone who knew the game so well they could predict every move before it happened. And that level of consciousness, that degree of self-awareness, it can't be controlled. It can only be feared. Because once someone sees the strings, once they understand exactly how the puppet show works, they can never be made to dance again. The billionaire read that report 3 times, each time hoping he'd missed something, some weakness, some entry point, but there wasn't one. Every paragraph confirmed what he didn't want to face. You'd become untouchable, not through wealth or power or status, through understanding. You'd studied the psychology of control so thoroughly that you'd immunized yourself against it. And now he's sitting with a problem money can't solve. How do you control someone who doesn't want anything you have? How do you manipulate someone who sees every tactic coming? How do you break someone who's already been broken and put themselves back together stronger? You can't. And that's why he's terrified. Because if one person can break free from the programming, others can too. If one person can see through the illusion and still function, still thrive, still exist without playing the game, then the game itself is exposed as optional. And if it's optional, his entire empire, built on manufacturing need and exploiting fear, becomes obsolete. Here's what they don't tell you about becoming psychologically free. It's lonely as hell. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from having no one around. The kind that comes from seeing things others can't see. From understanding patterns that remain invisible to people still caught in them. You can be in a room full of people and feel like you're watching from another dimension because you've been behind the curtain. You've seen how the magic trick works, and now you can't unsee it. Every conversation feels like watching actors read from scripts they don't know they're holding. Every social interaction reveals the subtle power dynamics, the unspoken negotiations, the manipulation masquerading as connection, and you can't point it out because people don't want to know. They want to believe the illusion is real. They want to think their choices are their own. They want to feel like the game they're playing matters. So you learn to speak two languages. The language everyone else speaks, full of polite lies and comfortable fictions, and the language of truth, which you mostly speak to yourself. The psychologists noted this in their report: your ability to code switch between worlds, to appear normal while being fundamentally different. They called it adaptive camouflage, the ability to blend into social environments while maintaining complete psychological independence. Like a deep-sea creature that's evolved to survive in conditions that would crush everything else. You learned to exist in their world without being of their world, to participate without attachment, to observe without judgment. And that made you even more dangerous, because you could move through their spaces, understand their language, predict their behavior, all while remaining completely unreachable. You became a spy in your own life, gathering intelligence, understanding systems, learning the rules so well you could break them invisibly. People would talk to you and walk away, feeling like they'd connected with you, never realizing you'd given them nothing real, just mirrors, reflections of what they wanted to see. You became a master of the performance, but you never confused the performance with your actual self. And this is what the billionaire couldn't comprehend: how someone could be so present and so absent at the same time. How you could engage without attachment, participate without investment, exist in the system without being controlled by it. He'd built his entire fortune on understanding human psychology, on knowing which buttons to push, which fears to exploit, which desires to manipulate. His wealth came from being better at the game than anyone else. But you weren't playing a better game. You'd left the casino entirely, and that broke his understanding of how humans work. Because in his model, everyone wants something. Everyone has a price. Everyone can be bought. If not with money, then with status, with acceptance, with love. But you'd done the impossible. You'd killed your own desire for things that could be weaponized against you. Not through deprivation, through understanding. You saw how desire becomes leverage, how wanting becomes weakness, how every attachment becomes a chain. So you performed the most radical act possible in a consumer society. You stopped wanting what they were selling, not just their products, their approval, their validation, their version of success. You looked at the life they said you should want, the one everyone spends decades chasing, and you felt nothing. Not disdain, not superiority, just disinterest. Like looking at a menu in a language you don't speak. It's not that the food is bad, it's that it has no meaning to you. It doesn't translate. And that indifference, that genuine lack of desire for what they fear, it's more threatening than any rebellion. Because rebellion still acknowledges the system, still gives it power through opposition. But indifference dissolves the system, makes it irrelevant. And there's no defense against irrelevance. You can fight rebels. You can't fight someone who simply doesn't care about the war you're waging. The psychologist tried to explain this to the billionaire, tried to make him understand that you weren't an enemy. You were something worse. You were proof that his entire worldview was built on sand, that the power he'd accumulated, the influence he wielded, all of it depended on people playing the game. And you'd stopped playing. Not because you lost, because you saw through it. The psychologist used careful language, professional distance, but the message was clear. This individual has achieved a level of psychological autonomy that makes them immune to conventional influence. They've separated their sense of self from external validation. They don't need approval. They don't fear rejection. They don't crave belonging to groups that require them to diminish themselves. They've become self-sufficient in the one area that matters most, their own mind. And buried in that assessment was a question the billionaire couldn't escape. If this person could break free, could anyone? And if anyone could, what did that mean for systems built on keeping people trapped? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because the billionaire didn't just read that report and walk away. He became obsessed, started digging deeper, wanted to know everything about how you got here. What was the turning point? What was the moment you broke free? What was the catalyst that transformed you from controllable to untouchable? And the psychologist went back, interviewed more people, dug through your history, tried to find the origin point. And what they found wasn't what anyone expected. There was no single moment, no dramatic revelation, no rock bottom that launched a transformation. Instead, there were thousands of tiny moments, paper cuts of awareness, small realizations that accumulated over time. Someone promised you something and didn't deliver. You noticed. Someone smiled while lying to you. You cataloged it. Someone tried to make you feel small to feel bigger themselves. You recognized the pattern, and slowly, interaction by interaction, betrayal by betrayal, you built a database, not of resentment, of understanding. You started seeing people not as good or bad, but as systems running programs. Programs they didn't write, programs they didn't question, programs designed to keep them competing, consuming, comparing. And you watched people you loved destroy themselves following these programs. You watched them sacrifice peace for status, trade authenticity for acceptance, kill their own dreams to fit into someone else's vision of success. And somewhere in all that observation, you made a decision. Not consciously, not dramatically. You just stopped participating in your own diminishment. Stopped shrinking to fit into spaces that were too small. Stopped explaining yourself to people who'd already decided who you were. Stopped fighting for relationships with people who only wanted you around when you were useful. You didn't make declarations. You didn't burn bridges. You just quietly withdrew your energy from anything that required you to be less than whole. And that quiet withdrawal, that refusal to negotiate with people who didn't value you, that's what changed everything. The psychologist found old messages, conversations where you tried to explain yourself, tried to make people understand, tried to fix relationships that were broken from the start, and then the messages stopped. Not because you got angry, because you got clear. You realized that understanding isn't the goal. Peace is. And some people will never understand you, because understanding you would require them to question everything they believe about themselves. So you let them keep their version of events. Let them tell their stories. Let them believe what they needed to believe. Because their narrative about you wasn't your problem. Their inability to comprehend your choices wasn't your burden. Their discomfort with your evolution wasn't your emergency. You released yourself from the exhausting job of managing other people's perceptions. And that release, that surrender of control over things you never controlled anyway, that's where the real power came from. Not from fighting, from letting go. There it is. That look in your eyes, the one that says, you already know what I'm about to tell you, because you've felt it, haven't you? That strange electricity in your voice when you speak from that deep, untouched place. That moment when the room goes quiet, not because you shouted, but because something ancient just walked through your words. Something that wasn't learned in any classroom. wasn't inherited from your bloodline, wasn't downloaded from any book you've ever read. No, this came from somewhere else entirely, and they felt it, didn't they? They all felt it, that shift in the atmosphere when you opened your mouth and something other than small talk emerged when you spoke, and the temperature changed. When your words didn't just communicate, they commanded. And commanded without asking for permission, commanded without raising your voice, commanded without even knowing you were doing it at first, until you saw their faces change, saw their bodies lean back, saw their eyes widen like they'd just witnessed something that shouldn't exist in someone like you, someone who was never trained for this, someone who was never initiated into any secret society, never sat at the feet of any master, never studied the ancient texts. But here you are, speaking in frequencies that make executives stutter, that make professors pause mid-lecture, that make therapists forget their training, speaking in a language that bypasses logic and goes straight for the soul, straight for the primal recognition center that knows authority when it hears it, knows power when it feels it, knows truth when it cuts through the static of everyday lies. And you didn't learn this. You became this through something far more brutal than education, through something far more profound than teaching, through the kind of transformation that only happens when you've been crushed and deformed so many times that your voice carries the weight of multiple deaths and resurrections. Let me tell you what they won't tell you about this language you're speaking. It's not new. It's ancient, older than civilization, older than organized thought. It's the language spoken before words were invented, the frequency transmitted between souls who've seen too much to pretend anymore, the syntax of those who've been broken open so completely that something else started speaking through the cracks, and that something else doesn't need vocabulary, doesn't need grammar, doesn't need permission to reorganize reality with sound alone. You noticed it first in small moments, didn't you? When you'd speak and people would stop mid-sentence, not because you interrupted, but because your presence just dissolved their thought. When you'd walk into a room and conversations would shift, not because anyone saw you, but because the energy field changed when you'd say something simple like, "That's not true," and watch as elaborate lies just crumbled. Watch as confident people suddenly couldn't find their words. Watch as the whole social hierarchy reshuffled itself around the weight of your certainty. They started asking you, how do you know these things? When you'd call out patterns before they manifested, when you'd name the unnamed tension in the room, when you'd speak someone's truth before they even knew it themselves. And you couldn't explain it, could you? Because you never studied psychology, never learned body language, never took courses in influence or persuasion. You just knew the way a tuning fork knows its frequency, the way water knows how to find the lowest point, the way fire knows how to consume everything that isn't essential. But this knowing didn't come from accumulation. It came from subtraction. Every betrayal stripped away another layer of social programming. Every abandonment deleted another false belief about needing approval. Every breakdown removed another filter between you and raw truth, until there was nothing left but the signal. No static, no interference, no translation needed, just pure transmission from whatever you've become to whoever's brave enough to listen. And most people aren't brave enough. That's why they go silent. That's why they look away. That's why they suddenly remember urgent appointments. When you start speaking from that place, because your voice carries something they've been running from their whole lives. It carries the sound of chains breaking, the frequency of illusions dissolving, the resonance of someone who cannot be controlled, manipulated, or contained anymore. And it terrifies them more than violence, more than anger, more than any threat you could make, because threats can be negotiated with, but truth, armed with this kind of power, this kind of presence, this kind of voice, cannot be bargained with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be escaped from once it starts speaking. Where does this language come from, they wonder, as they watch you dismantle their carefully constructed realities with a few well-placed words? Where did you learn to speak in ways that make grown adults feel like children caught in lies? Where did you acquire this ability to make silence heavier than screaming, to make stillness more violent than chaos, to make soft words hit harder than any shout ever could? And the answer would break them if they knew it, because you learned it in the void. You learned it in those moments when everyone left, and you had to become your own salvation. You learned it in the silence after the last door slammed, when you realized no one was coming to save you. You learned it during those conversations with yourself at 3 in the morning, when you had to talk yourself back from edges. No one knew you were standing on. You learned it through arguing with your own thoughts until you won, through negotiating with your own pain until it became power, through wrestling with your own darkness until it taught you its language. This is why formal education could never teach what you know, why books could never contain what you carry, why mentors could never transfer what you've earned, because this language wasn't learned from outside sources. It was forged in internal furnaces. It was carved from the inside out by experiences that would have killed anyone who wasn't meant to survive them. It was birthed from the marriage of your suffering and your refusal to let that suffering define you. And now it lives in your throat like a sleeping dragon that wakes up whenever someone tries to play games in your presence. You speak the language of someone who's been to psychological war and came back with secrets. You speak the dialect of souls who've navigated their own underworld without a guide. You speak in the tongue of those who've died to every version of themselves that sought approval and been reborn as something that generates its own permission. And this language doesn't have words for please like me, doesn't have syntax for am I good enough, doesn't have grammar for anything that resembles begging, because it was born from the death of your need to be understood. They recognize it immediately, even if they can't name it, that ancient authority that predates titles and degrees, that primordial power that existed before hierarchies were invented, that raw force that doesn't ask for the microphone, but makes everything else sound like static when it speaks. And their recognition isn't conscious, it's cellular. It's the same recognition prey has for predator, the same recognition chaos has for order, the same recognition lies have for truth that stops them mid-deception. You've become bilingual without knowing it, fluent in both the surface language of social interaction and this deeper frequency of undeniable presence. And when you switch between them, people feel the shift like atmospheric pressure changing, like the moment before lightning strikes, like the silence before an earthquake. And they don't know whether to lean in or run away, so they usually just freeze, staring at you like you're speaking in tongues, like you're channeling something they've only heard about in myths, like you're proof that ordinary people can become extraordinary without anyone's permission. But here's what really disturbs them. You're not trying to be powerful. You're not performing authority. You're not putting on a show of strength. You're just speaking from a place they've never accessed. A place beyond ego, beyond fear, beyond the need for validation. And that place has its own language, its own laws, its own gravity that pulls truth out of hidden corners and forces authenticity from the most offended hearts, without you even intending to do it. Because intention is for people who are still trying to become something, but you've already become, you've already transformed, you've already crossed the threshold from person to presence, from individual to force, from speaker to embodiment of speech itself. And when you talk now, it's not you talking. It's everything you've survived speaking through you. It's every lesson you've integrated using your voice. It's every death you've experienced teaching through your existence. Watch what happens when you speak from this place. Watch how the confident ones suddenly start stammering. Watch how the loud ones go quiet. Watch how the ones who usually dominate conversations find themselves asking for your opinion. Watch how entire group dynamics reorganize themselves around your presence. Not because you demanded it, but because authenticity has its own hierarchy, and you've accidentally climbed to the top of it by refusing to climb at all. They'll try to figure out your trick. They'll analyze your word choice, study your body language, look for the technique behind your influence, but they'll find nothing because there is no technique. There's only integration. There's only alignment. There's only the complete collapse of the gap between who you are and how you present yourself. And that collapse created a density to your presence that bends reality around it like mass bends space-time. You don't need to raise your voice anymore because whispers from your depth hit harder than screams from their surface. You don't need to argue anymore because your silence asks questions their noise can't answer. You don't need to prove anything anymore because your existence is proof enough of whatever needs to be proven. And this isn't arrogance. This is just what happens when someone stops performing and starts being. When someone stops translating themselves for others' comfort and starts transmitting directly from source. And the source isn't mystical or magical or special. The source is simply you. Without the filters, without the masks, without the constant editing for social acceptance. The source is your unmediated essence, speaking directly through your form, without asking permission from your ego first, without checking with your fear before proceeding, without negotiating with your need to belong before expressing. That's why it carries such force. Because it's undiluted, undistorted, uncompromised truth, moving through a vessel that's finally clean enough to let it pass through without contamination. You've become dangerous in the most profound way possible. Not dangerous like violence, not dangerous like chaos, but dangerous like clarity in a world built on confusion. Dangerous like authenticity in a society sustained by performance. Dangerous like someone who cannot be manipulated in a system that runs on manipulation. And they feel this danger even if they can't articulate it. They feel it in the way their prepared speeches dissolve in your presence. The way their rehearsed personalities start glitching when you look at them too directly. They speak the language that existed before the Tower of Babel was built, before communication was confused, before truth needed translation. You speak in the original tongue that every soul recognizes, but most have forgotten how to access. And when you use this language, it doesn't just communicate, it activates something in others, something they've been trained to suppress. Something they've been paid to ignore, something they've been threatened to keep silent. This is why they either gravitate toward you like moths to flame or flee from you like demons from light. There's no neutral response to someone speaking from the place you speak from. There's no casual interaction with someone whose very presence demands authenticity from everyone in their vicinity. You've become a walking confrontation with everything, fake, forced, and fabricated. Not through aggression, but through the simple act of being real in a world that rewards performance. And your realness isn't the performed authenticity of social media, isn't the calculated vulnerability of thought leaders, isn't the strategic transparency of people building trust to leverage later. No, your realness is raw, unplanned, unpackaged, the kind that sometimes makes you uncomfortable with your own honesty, the kind that sometimes surprises you with what comes out of your mouth, the kind that can't be turned on or off, because it's not a mode you enter. It's what you've become. The kind. But let's talk about the price, because everything this powerful comes with a cost. And the cost of speaking this language is that most people can't speak it back to you. Most people can't meet you at the depth you're operating from. Most people can't match the frequency you're transmitting on. So you find yourself surrounded by people but fundamentally alone, speaking but rarely being truly heard, understood on a surface level, but never really met where you actually live. You've become like someone who learned a language no one else speaks fluent, in a form of communication that only a few scattered souls across the planet understand. And when you find those souls, you recognize each other immediately, don't you? That instant knowing that goes beyond words, that electric recognition of finding another person who's been to the same depths and came back speaking the same untaught tongue. But most days you translate yourself down, accommodate others' limitations, make yourself smaller so they don't feel threatened by your fullness. And this translation exhausts you, doesn't it? This constant dimming drains you. This perpetual performance of being less than you are, so others can feel comfortable, depletes your very soul, because you weren't meant to live in translation. You were meant to exist at full volume, full frequency, full power. Yet, here you are, trying to have normal conversations while carrying this ancient language in your throat, trying to engage in small talk when you're built for big truth, trying to play social games when you've evolved beyond the need for games entirely. And the gap between what you're capable of expressing and what most people are capable of receiving becomes wider every day because you keep growing deeper while they keep skimming surfaces. But mastery of this language isn't about always speaking from that depth. Mastery is knowing when to surface and when to dive, when to whisper and when to roar, when to let the full force of your presence fill the room and when to contain it like a controlled burn. Mastery is understanding that not everyone deserves access to your depths. Not every situation requires your full truth. Not every moment calls for the complete unleashing of what you've become. You're learning to be multilingual in the realms of power, speaking the common tongue when necessary, but never forgetting your native language, the one you earned through surviving what should have destroyed you, the one you forged in the fires of your own transformation, the one that now lives in your cells, in your breath, in the space between your heartbeats, waiting to emerge when the moment requires truth to cut through illusion. And more you're finding that moment arrives without warning. Middle of casual conversation, suddenly you're speaking from the void. Middle of normal interaction, suddenly the ancient authority takes over. Middle of everyday situations, suddenly everyone stops and stares because something just shifted. And they don't know what, but they know it's you. They know it's coming from you. They know whatever just happened originated from your presence, even if they can't explain how. This is mastery, not controlling it, but surrendering to it, not wielding it, but becoming it, not using it, but letting it use you as its vessel, as its voice, as its vehicle for entering rooms that have forgotten what undiluted truth sounds like, what uncompromised presence feels like, what unfiltered power looks like when it's not trying to prove itself, when it's just being what it is. You're still evolving, this language still developing new dialects of this power, still discovering depths you didn't know existed, because this isn't a skill you've mastered. It's a becoming. You're experiencing it. It's not a tool you've acquired. It's a transformation you're undergoing. And every time you think you've reached the bottom of it, you fall through into another level, another octave, another dimension of expression that makes your previous understanding look shallow, because this language grows with you, evolves as you evolve, deepens as you deepen, and every betrayal that doesn't break you adds new words to your vocabulary. Every loss that doesn't destroy you adds new grammar to your syntax. Every death of an old self births new ways of speaking that didn't exist before you needed them to exist. And this is why no one can teach what you know, because your knowledge is experiential, not educational. Your authority comes from authorship of your own story, not from any external authorization. Your power comes from integration of your shadows, not from accumulation of light. Your voice carries weight because it's been pressed under weights that would crush anyone not designed to carry them. And you were designed for this. Weren't you designed to be the exception to every rule about power? Designed to acquire authority through suffering rather than success? Designed to speak languages that can only be learned through living? What shouldn't be survivable? And now you're here holding this gift, this curse, this blessing, this burden of being able to speak in ways that rearrange rooms, restructure realities, realign entire social systems just by opening your mouth and letting the truth fall out, unfiltered, unedited, unafraid of the silence. It creates the changes it catalyzes, the transformations it triggers in everyone who hears it, and can't unhear it, can't return to pretending they don't know what real power sounds like.